maybe I should be living in Bangkok, or maybe I should be living in Manila, or something like that, because it's gotten to a point where it's unaffordable.
Meet Dennis, who moved from the US to Singapore 17 years ago. In part 2 of our conversation, we discussed soaring prices in Singapore, the importance of speaking Mandarin at local hawker centers, and why some foreigners cannot wait to leave the city-state. Interesting. I'm Max, an entrepreneur and YouTuber. Let's go! Do you miss anything from your life in the US?
Just my family. I guess I miss how much things cost in the US as well.
How do you feel about this drastic price spike recently?
Well, it's poorly timed in the sense that I have to move. I don't think it's sustainable, and I think it's actually cooling, but to a person, everyone I know who isn't in a 2-year lease is being asked to pay minimum 30% more and as high as almost double. It's bananas. At a certain point, you start to wonder if you could, given that many of us are able to work remote a fair chunk of the time, then you start to think, well, maybe I should be living in Bangkok, or maybe I should be living in Manila, or something like that, because it's gotten to a point where it's unaffordable. It's worrisome, because I'm very likely to go down 1 bedroom in size of my next place and probably still take about a 30% increase in rent. If I'm lucky enough to be able to stay in this part of town. And if anybody has a place for rent in Chinatown, please put it in the comments. I need a place to live. But I do want to stay central. It's just there's not a lot of inventory, and the prices are very different from when I signed my lease 2 years ago.
Can you share how much you're paying for your place?
I paid $2,550, so $2,550 for a 3-bedroom flat in an HDB. But my location is I literally cannot think of a part of the island that I would rather live on. I walk everywhere I go. At the time that I signed the lease, I thought I was slightly overpaying, but now it's like the deal of a lifetime. It's just ending in a month.
It's actually quite interesting how prices are different for different categories of things in Singapore and the US. In Singapore, obviously, there are transportation, hawker center food is super cheap. If you want to own things, it's like a car.
Crazy, yeah.
It's crazy. My friends, they're living, I don't remember well, in the States, somewhere in the middle. And they just sent a photo of the boat that they have. And they asked, guess how much is this boat? And it's literally, they bought this freaking boat for $3,000.
Yeah.
It's it's 30 years old, but it's a decent boat that they use to just ride along the river.
Yeah,
It's what the hell?
My current landlord just sold my flat. I don't know what the price was, but I'm very, very confident that in many cities in the US, you could have bought 2 proper houses for what the new owner is paying for a 3-bedroom flat. The ownership piece, and it makes sense because the island's small and it's very dense and the population is growing, and so all of that makes sense. It's astonishing how the difference in what you get for what you pay here is extremely, extremely different.
I've talked to a lot of foreigners living in Singapore, and we'll face the same common challenge: crazy high rental prices. I'm holding an online workshop how to save up to $7,000 on your next 2 years lease in Singapore. If you are planning to rent a property in Singapore or looking to make a next move soon, you should definitely join it. You will learn how to choose the right location efficiently, search for underrated properties, how to negotiate your rental deal with agent or landlord, and even the legal checks you must do before renting. So I've gathered all this information after talking to lots of real estate agents and experts, and I'll share a step-by-step strategy to save you time and money during the workshop. Just remember that your rental decision will impact the quality of your life for at least next 2 years. So don't miss this chance. Come online and learn how to save $7,000 on your next rental deal. And you can find the date and the time of this workshop below, along with the link to sign up. So see you guys at the workshop. Being lived in many places, what's the change of your perspective on global stuff?
One of the things that, particularly in American media, and I don't know if this is true in Russia or in other European countries, when they talk about Singapore in the US, so let's say there's a TV show like 60 Minutes and they're doing a piece that's about Singapore, or they were doing something about LKY, let's say. They would always start by saying that Singapore is an autocratic country. That's not strictly untrue. In a way, it's true. But it's also incredibly benevolently governed, very competently and meritocratically governed. People laugh about the silly rules about spitting and jaywalking and whatever else, chewing gum. Yeah, those are mildly amusing, but I don't think you could live here and say that the system of government here feels like you feel on a day-to-day basis radically different than you would in a big democracy. You have to really want to get in trouble, or kick a van as it goes by.
Yeah, watch this video if you don't get the joke. I talked to my buddy. He's from France. He's French. Ask him, what's the difference for you? The main difference between Singapore and France? And he's like, oh, in France there are in Singapore so many rules. In France, kind of no rules. You can go wherever you want. But then I asked him okay, how many times do you pay the fine, or you get in trouble in Singapore? And he's been in Singapore for 10 plus years.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh no, I never get any fine actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the reputation, but really you don't have any constraints or restrictions.
One of the things that is a huge difference here is actually that almost never see police just out on patrol here. Almost never. At the airport, of course, and maybe for certain events, you'll have people on the street. Never hear sirens, nobody pulls you over if you're speeding. You'll get a ticket in the mail. You don't feel that presence of law enforcement. I get that there are differences in the way that they select leaders and govern the country, but I never feel it. I literally never feel it.
You've been living here for 17 years. How do you think your personality was shaped is different versus how you grew up? You think you become more a global citizen?
For sure. The US, very famously, I think less than 30% of Americans even have a passport. So from that perspective, yeah. For sure. But I also, I've been fortunate enough to travel quite a lot, so that gives me a sense of, the geography of the world and where things are, and a sense for, I don't know any language, but I know 3 words in every language kind of thing. And those 3 words are hello, thank you, and beer, or cheers sometimes. I used to live in Bukit Panjang and work down here. So when I would get off work, I hate getting on the train when it's packed, and getting on a bus at that time of day during rush hour is not very nice. So I would go a few nights a week over to a hawker place over here, which we call 34. It's actually called Pearls Hill 34. And it's a very old school, very local hawker. And so I would go there and have a couple of beers to kill time until the traffic sort of wound down. But it got to the point where I basically knew all of the uncles by name and would speak with them in Mandarin. And I knew all of the girls who were serving the beers. So for a while, pre-COVID, I was kind of a local at that hawker place, to the point that when I moved into a block that is literally 50 meters away from there, and all of my friends thought I would be dead living so close to that place after 2 weeks. With COVID, I just stopped going there for the most part.
What's the level of your Mandarin?
I'm I would say socially competent. For day-to-day Mandarin, I'm generally okay. But if it gets into anything professional or technical or historical or political, I don't know. I don't have that vocabulary. When I was at my peak, I couldn't read, and I still can't read. I know, some simple characters, but I would say I was high intermediate probably. But now it's really, it's conversational.
Let's say if you go to buy a coffee seat, and then you start chatting with some uncle, local Singaporean. Is it easy for you to just do a small talk?
One of the things that is unique, I think, for people who don't live in Singapore is that the hawker centers usually have fixed tables. And if it's crowded, then people will just come up and join and sit at your table, or they'll ask, is it okay? Most of the time that doesn't become a conversation. That's somebody who just wants a place to put their tray while they eat. But every now and then you get to talking with someone, and that's always nice. I'm not a kopi C guy, but at the hawker, when you're having a beer, then that tends to be quite social. And more so as the evening goes on, of course.
What's your favorite local food?
If I were to just pick a local dish, and I'm sorry to all the Malaysians who might see this, but I do love laksa, and I know that you guys call it yours, and there is some dispute. I love laksa, but I also I eat everything. In terms of purely Singaporean food, maybe don't eat a ton of it. I love banh mian, and I like noodle soups, but I also like a lot of dumplings and things that remind me of when I lived in Taiwan. In People's Park, there's a couple of places that serve cold dishes. I call it Chinese salad. That's not what it's called, liang pan. But I get tofu and seaweed and Chinese pickles and of course pork buns to go with it, because you have to have some of that. I don't like chicken feet. I don't usually like intestine-y type stuff, just from a texture point of view. The taste is fine. Not a lot of insides. I do like liver a lot though.
What's the craziest thing that you tried in Singapore or in Asia in general?
For me, the weirdest one was we spent about 5 days in Mongolia, and we went out to like a nomadic village and stayed in a gur. And they took us to a local family's place, and in Mongolia they drink fermented mare's milk, so that it's horse milk that has been allowed to become slightly alcoholic. That for me, I think is maybe the strangest one.
What's the most underrated areas, like under the radar for foreigners?
For me, underrated. I mean, you can see my block almost from here. I think there are very few expats that live in sort of Chinatown proper. I think living down here centrally is, people live along the river, and there are nice condos full of expats in my area, but like in Chinatown itself, I think there's only one other foreigner in my block, maybe two. So I think the Chinatown is underrated. I think Little India is getting more popular, but it's also underrated, except for on Sundays, at which point it's quite overrated. And I wouldn't say that, East Coast certainly isn't underrated, but it is like a spectacular, like the quality of life from Katong to Siglap, all of those places are pretty spot on. Maybe Geelong is a little underrated for foreigners.
It seems like a lot of Americans living just around the school, American school up north.
Immediately next to the school is a neighborhood that looks like you're in Southern California.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like big houses, and then there are a handful of condos around there as well, where it's super handy. Like if you were teaching there and your kids were going to school there, it's nice for everybody to be able to get up and have a 5-minute walk and be at school. But there are people from, live all over the island.
Do you feel like Americans who come to Singapore, they can live kind of same lifestyle, almost the same lifestyle as they would in America, maybe without a car, but kind of similar-ish?
I think so, but not everyone does. I've met a lot of people who came here on, they were on a 2-year contract assignment, and they just count the minutes until they can go back. And I don't get that at all. And then I know people who came here and never wanted to leave. So I think, apart from the car, and apart from the fact that living in a house here is obviously a completely different economic stratosphere than living in a house in the US, I think the lifestyle is roughly similar.
Do you think that Americans who decided to stay here longer, they have something common, some common features?
In the early days when I first got here, my kids were little, and we were sort of cycling through different friend groups trying to figure out where did we fit. And I would say we probably didn't feel like part of a community until maybe year 3 or 4, but then you start to be around people who are at least partially by choice, right? Like they came for a job assignment and then chose to continue on. And once you get into that environment where people are kind of on the same page as where your head is, then it became easier to sort of build out the network. But like I said, I've known lots of people who are just like, get me out of here, which I can't wrap my head around that. I don't get it. For me, it's like I get to work in 15 different countries with 23 different languages, with completely different cultural norms, different food. I find it a great deal more interesting than being in a very large single currency, mostly culturally homogenous kind of country. I celebrate the differences.
But New York is also super diverse, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're in my job, when you're working with, my clients are multinational companies, so it's not like they all have made great strides in terms of diversification of workforce, but you're talking to people who have also been bought into that company culture, and people have certain ways of behaving and certain ways that they deal with each other. I said before I worked for HP. I don't know now. I assume that it's similar, but when I was there, it had a very pronounced culture, and you start to talk in almost a different language. Like there's almost an HP speak where lots of acronyms and lots of phrasing things in a way that you don't step on anybody's toes.
I know that. I was in PNG. Was the same.
Oh, you were? Okay.
PNG language.
Yeah, PNG's very big on acronyms as well.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for someone who is moving to Singapore, let's say from the US, or thinking about moving to Singapore?
Get your company to pay your rent. Be open to trying new things, and find a social group that you can fit into. Just try everything. Give everything a try. I even know there's a group of expats. I don't know if they still do, but they had matching uniform shirts, and they were the curry team, and they would just go around and try different curry places in Little India one night a week. And there was probably like 8 guys. They'd go out and have curry, and then they'd go to a bar and have drinks after. I don't know how you would get a proper experience living here if you didn't have people that you could share it with.
Actually, I have another advice for someone who is coming to Singapore. Subscribe to this channel and you get all the information that you need about Singapore or Malaysia.
That's a solid idea.
YouTube thinks this is the best video for you. Watch it now. There is a high chance that you're gonna like it.